I want to extend a warm welcome to those joining us today. My name is Brent Fuel, and I have the privilege of moderating what I know will be an exciting and informative conversation today. But let's start with a little place setting. Utah is a land of breathtaking beauty and rich natural heritage. Nearly 64% of the state, that's about 35 million acres, is federal public land. And to put that into perspective, that's roughly the size of the entire state of Arkansas. That reality brings tremendous benefits, but also very real challenges. On one hand, Utah's public lands provide unmatched opportunities for hunting, fishing, recreation, grazing, and tourism, things that make Utah such an amazing place. And on the other hand, federal ownership can limit local communities' ability to grow, constraining housing, infrastructure, schools, and the tax base needed to support essential services. And let's be honest, these debates can get heated and polarizing, as we witnessed during the recent budget reconciliation debate. I recognize that when people hear federal land sales or land disposal, some immediately worry about losing access to hunting or grazing or about the risks of unchecked growth. Others raise concern about a slippery slope, selling off not just parcels in Utah, but potentially vast stretches of federal land across the West. Let me emphasize, that's not what today's discussion is about. Our goal is to sort through perceptions and realities affecting Utah. Because these debates touch on values people care deeply about: access, tradition, growth, and opportunity. The pressures facing Utah communities aren't going away. These tensions deserve thoughtful, balanced solutions, and that's where Conserve America comes in. For those unfamiliar with us and our work, Conserve America is a nonprofit organization committed to advancing pragmatic solutions to today's toughest conservation and energy challenges. Today's discussion is part of Conserve America's monthly webinar series tackling tough but timely topics. We believe conservation and economic growth are not mutually exclusive, but can and must go hand in hand. So today's discussion is about finding that balance. How does Utah protect its natural treasures while also ensuring strong, thriving local communities? How can federal land policy be better structured to support Utah's urgent social needs without undermining conservation goals? Can federal-state cooperation improve access to checkerboard lands and resolve conflicts over hunting, recreation, and growth? These are critical questions. And we are fortunate today to have a distinguished panel with us to help explore and answer these questions. And I'll introduce them shortly, but before I do, let me just thank everyone for tuning in. This is a timely and essential conversation, and I look forward to a candid and constructive dialogue. As with all of our webinars, we do encourage those calling in to ask questions, so please take the time to put in the questions in the chat box, and we'll get to those as we can. Now let's jump into today's program. Introduce our guest. All three of our guests are native Utahns. We've got Brian Wheat, who serves as the Chief of Staff to Representative Celeste Beloy. Brian is actually traveling today in Utah, so he's maybe in his car right now. But Brian, grateful for your time. And we also have Reg Johnson, who serves as the Deputy Director of Utah Department of Natural Resources and the Director of the Governor's Public Lands Office. And last but not least, we have Eric Clark, General Counsel for Utah Association of Counties. Reg drew a short straw and has agreed to go first. And he's agreed to share a few slides with us that I think might help folks have a better context of the topic that we're talking about. So, Reg, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Brent. Appreciate the introduction. It's great to be here with you today and discuss some of the opportunities and challenges that we face with public lands in the state of Utah. So let's just maybe hop right into the slide deck and get those out of the way, and then we can go into our discussion. So we can go to the next slide. Meredith would be great. A lot of times visuals help us tell the story. This first visual, the map on the left, is how these lands looked after the Federal Land Policy Management Act, FLPMA, was passed. So these are BLM lands. The yellow that you see there indicate all of the BLM lands in the state of Utah as of 1976. Now, what's important here is to note that every single acre when FLPMA was passed was open for multiple use and sustained yield. And the sustained yield is important to keep in mind. That's how we look at conservation. If we're grazing, we only take a certain amount so that, we can be grazing there in 2,000 years. It's the sustainable use of those lands. Now, where we have some frustration in the state of Utah is what's happened since 1976. So when FLTMA passed, that was the agreement with the counties, with the states, with our local legislatures. Everybody agreed that if these lands all remained open to multiple use and sustained yield, we can have good economic opportunities in these rural counties, especially some of our counties that are, 96 plus% federal lands. We can work with the federal government. We can make this work. But since then, what we've seen are BLM restrictions that have come on. And some of this is through rulemaking, some of it's congressional. But you can see the litany of different areas that we have, national monuments, areas of critical environmental concern, wilderness areas, wilderness study areas, lands with wilderness characteristics, wild and scenic rivers. So the list goes on and on. And the problem that comes up when you put these restrictions on is it starts to limit what you can do for multiple use. And as important, it limits what we can do for active management. So if we're talking about sage grouse, right, and we're trying to take back some of the juniper pinyon encroachment, in some of these areas, we're not able to use mechanized equipment. So the habitat or the habitat for those birds, which are, a big argument right now. We're having difficulty managing for promoting that bird's habitat. So it's a lot more than just economics. It really is part of the ethos that we have to protect these ecosystems here in the state of Utah. We want to see good stewardship, and these designations sometimes hinder that. So let's go to the next slide. Another hot topic we know is the roadless rule. There's been a lot of discussion about rolling this roadless rule back. The state of Utah is not opposed to having areas where we have limited road access. But again, what we're seeing here is it impacts the way that we're able to manage these lands. If you look at some of our most severe fires, they are coming in these areas where we have the roadless rule because we're not able to go in there, do active management, reduce those fuel loads. So when a fire starts, it's even more difficult to contain and to get control of. So let's go to the next slide. This next slide really helps you visualize what's going on in our roadless areas. So I took my kids up for a pack trip, a horse pack trip. The ridgeline behind our tent right there is roadless. And that's the condition of many, if not most, of the roadless areas in the state of Utah. Now, the irony is that ridgeline has a number of old logging roads in it. And, 70 some years ago, they were doing some logging projects in there. But we cannot use the roads in the roadless areas to go in and do active management. So we can't touch this area, even though we have all this beetle kill, all this fuel load. I guess we're just waiting for it to burn. But we would really like to get in there, actively manage that, remove some of that fuel loads. And then afterwards, we're happy, to make those roads administrative access only. So you still have, areas where the wildlife can go and they have a refuge, if you will. People can go up like we did on horseback and enjoy those without the roads in there. So it's not about opening the roads for the state of Utah with the roadless rule. It's really about proper management and being able to use those existing roads in these roadless areas to do the proper work and get these forests back in shape so everybody can enjoy them and wildlife can enjoy them, et cetera. So let's go to the next slide. So Brent, you alluded to this a little bit when we're talking about sale of public lands, and this is a case in point about what you should or shouldn't believe when you get on the internet. I think everybody knows that you can't believe everything you read on the internet. So the map on the left is what the Wilderness Society put out, and I think everybody on the call recognizes there was a real uproar about, selling off all of these federal lands. So the map on the right is what the actual language that came out in Senator Lee's bill identified for lands for disposal. And if you can see the small red polygons on that map, those are the lands that were available for disposal with the final language. So that equates, so the wilderness map said, there's around 18 to 20 million acres in the state of Utah that are up for sale. Reality is on the right, those little red polygons, there was about 50 to 60,000 acres. Now, knowing what I know about this, even the 60,000 acres, if you're down there around Cedar City, some polygons down there, those lands, you take out all the slope, proximity to water, proximity to electricity. Across the entire state, what we were really looking at is 7 to 10,000 maps of lands inside city limits for the most part, a few that are, adjoining city limits, but that's really where our focus was to try to find some available lands for housing because Utah is a growing state and we do need additional property for some limited housing. And 7 to 10,000 acres is, about the target that we were looking at. So I think that's a good visual to show what Utah was trying to get to and what was messaged out there that got everybody concerned when they saw this map on the left. Let's go to the next slide. The next two are just pictures of some of the properties of what we were really looking at. I heard from some of my best friends who are hunters, what are you doing out there, promoting the sale of these lands? And I'm like, whoa, time out. Anything that's like habitat where I would go hunting and where I would go fishing, that's not what we're talking about. This is what we're talking about. This parcel is surrounded on three sides by current development. It's inside city limits in St. George. These are the type of lands that we were trying to get to so that we could acquire these without going through years and years of plan revisions and NEPA and things like that, that we could just simplify the process to move some of these parcels into state or private ownership so that we could do some development for housing in the state of Utah. Let's go to the next slide. Next slide is Beaver County. The slide on the right, you can see I-15 there in the back. It borders I-15, borders a gravel pit. We're actually looking at this for some recreation purposes and for some housing. So those are the type of properties that we were looking at during the reconciliation bill. Let's go to the next slide. I think that's it. Yep. Okay. So that's a little introduction about some of the issues that we've been working on. I do want to say that, Utah, we love our public lands. Everybody in the state, we really love our public lands. We visit our public lands. We're not interested in seeing them all sold off. We're not interested in seeing them all developed. But there are instances where it makes sense, especially those lands inside city limits, that we would look at those for an alternate use. But when it comes to our parks or the forests where we hunt or the BLM lands where we hunt and fish, absolutely want to keep those public lands, properly managed, but public lands.
Reg, thank you. That's a very helpful introduction, and those maps do provide a great context. So, Eric, last week we had a conversation about, a lot of the benefits of having public lands and BLM lands around. I mean, it's a playground for many and also working ground for others for grazing. But having public lands, 64% of Utah, can create some challenges and even impact the way that families live their lives. And you talked about one of those when you were at school. Share for us again, kind of how those decisions by the federal government can affect families.
Thanks, Brent. And thanks for doing this stuff and having these conversations. I think they're really important to have. So I'm kind of unique in that I grew up in the area that is now the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. A little town of 500 people and at the base of Bryce Canyon National Park. And we've felt the impacts of decision making that happens top down without local input. A great example is I was in high school when that monument was designated, and my school or the school district was in the process of going through one of the federal processes to get some land for a baseball field. And it was close enough to the finish line that they had come in and had ripped out our current field because we didn't have a track. So they were putting in a high school track there, and then across the street from the school, we were going to get a new baseball field. The funding was lined up and everything was moving, and then President Clinton designated the national monument, and that was put on hold for several years until Congress could pass a law giving that baseball field land to the school district. And so my little brothers did batting practice in cow pastures. And if you hit it too far, you had to jump over to the fence where the poles were and jump back really quick. And there are just there are times that it's easy to forget because there's such small communities that live in these areas how much they're impacted by the different decisions that are made, but they really are, and it impacts quality of life. Like you said, Brent, it was an amazing place to grow up. We had the best playground ever. In the summers, we could go down in the desert above Lake Powell, and that was 15 minutes one way. And or in the winters, we could go down to the desert. In the summers, we could go up on top of the mountain at Bryce Canyon, 15 minutes the other way. So we were always able to be out having fun, loving the land that we lived
Hmm.
in. Um, but sometimes things come in that fundamentally change lifestyles. And I can talk about that and get into that a little bit more as we go on today.
Yeah, we'll get into that as well. So, Brian is a fellow Utahn growing up in Utah with all these incredible public lands out there. Give us your perspective, both, at home, but also kind of the landscape in Washington, D.C. So,
You bet, Brent. So first of all, I want to say thanks for the opportunity to be here. I appreciate you putting this together. I also appreciate an opportunity to be in the same conversation as Reg and Eric. I mean, I these two guys are just fantastic. And Eric actually years ago was my first legal supervisor of my first internship in law school. So we've worked together a long time. Um, and I just want to acknowledge something really cool that's on this call. And as I say how grateful I am to be a part of it, is we all love our public lands here. We all love the gift and the national treasure that those are to us in our lives. And to to and actually, Brent, just to correct you a tiny little bit, I grew up just over the border in southeast Idaho, which is a
okay.
lot like northern Utah anyway. It's same kind of analysis there. But I grew up in a little town called Ingham, Idaho, and I grew up enjoying public lands. It's like sometimes I'll make the joke, and I don't want to. Um, I heard him say it the other day, but there are a lot of people who might love public lands as much as I do, but I haven't met anyone yet who loves them more than I do. And grew up hunting as a young person. I worked for the Forest Service for about a decade um, as a seasonal worker. A lot of people go to school for 10 years. They're called doctors, or like lawyers who took too long to go through school and liked working for the Forest Service a little too much. Um, and so I did that as a firefighter, as a recreationalist, and things like that. And it's great to be in these conversations because of how I feel about them. So, and then I get a chance to work for a member like Congresswoman Malloy, who that's kind of that's her expertise, right? And not only that, but I get to work in the second district where the vast majority of our land are public lands, where we have this big mix of in her district along the Wasatch Front, but also in southern Utah, down in and also out to our rural counties of just large swaths of public land and people who live when it comes to what their lives and realities are like and their interactions with public lands. These are people who love public lands as much as we do, who care about them, who want to have a healthy landscape, who want to um, live alongside these great places, but also have a common sense approach of multiple use to put them to appropriate use, to preserve them, and to make sure that, you know, that we get the opportunities we can out of them. So um, that's me, and it's been a fun conversation the last couple of months. There's been a lot of there's just been a lot happening when it comes to public lands policy, and I think it's been said here. There's been some fact, there's been some myth, there's been some emotion. The emotion's very understandable because we love this so much. But I'm grateful to be able to help listen and help my boss carve out a line where there's good pragmatic and thoughtful management of these lawns of these lands and just get exciting things done, you
Yeah.
know. So thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Brian. I think a lot of our listening audience, some of them may not understand how federal lands are sold or the policy, the National Policy, Federal Land Policy and Management Act, known as FLPMA. So, Reg, maybe you can shed a little bit of light on that. Why this controversy now? What's, maybe where FLPMA is not working well. I mean, give us, your take on why we're having this conversation now.
Sure. So yes, there are a couple processes that you can use for disposing of federal lands, and one of those is the Recreation Public Purposes Act, and we use that quite often. It can be used for quite a number of things, not just recreation, but landfills. We've used it for landfills. We've used it for shooting ranges. We've used it for bike paths, and
And that's an older law that was created back, I think, 1926, correct, Reg?
yep.
Before FLPMA was, yep.
Yep. So we use that one, but it's a long process. And a lot of times if BLM has like the Dingle Act that was passed, right? They prioritize those congressional acts before they do recreation public purpose. So while we do the application, it's great. Sometimes those take a decade or more to get done for things that the counties or the cities really need in a tighter, shorter time frame. The disposal process is also another way that we can have these lands looked at, but that process also takes a long time. You have to go through the NEPA process. It's often litigated by these groups that love to litigate on anything under the sun, and that holds up the process. Then you also just have the workload of the federal government and the employees about how fast they can get their cadastral surveys done, how fast they can go through the NEPA process. And so that process, while I'm not going to say it's broken, it's so cumbersome that it takes a long time. And if we want a different parcel than something that's already identified in their land use plan, then we have to go through a land use plan amendment before we can even start on the NEPA. So the red tape is onerous, which is why both Representative Malloy and Senator Lee tried to find a way that we could just move a couple of these parcels forward without going through that extended red tape. It has been done in the past. Southern Nevada has a proposal. I think we might be talking about that later. So I'll leave that to the discussion.
And
Go ahead, Eric.
Brand, if I can, like I'll be a little stronger than Reg. I think it is broken. Like I just think if I walk into my local BLM office and I say, hey, we have so for the last 15 years I've worked by and large in Washington County, which is southwest Utah, 90 miles from Las Vegas, adjacent to Clark County, Nevada, which is the county that has Las Vegas, and our population's growing. And if I walk into the BLM office and say, hey, we've identified a need for a new water reservoir so we can have a water reuse system and be better in our water conservation efforts. And I say, let's talk about all the different processes. Let's talk about recreation public purpose. Let's talk about land exchange. Let's talk about congressional action, whatever, all of our different options. And if the only thing that takes less than a decade is going to Congress, and we all know how super functional Congress is, no offense to Brian and the Congresswoman, but like the only thing that we can get done in less than 10 years is that's not a functional, we can't plan and function in our communities if that's the way the system works.
Reg, you raised the Southern Nevada Public Land Management Act, which is obviously unique to Nevada. I'd ask you and others, do you see an opportunity or a pathway forward to have a similar initiative, a program for Utah? Obviously, Utah is, unlike many other states, a huge proportion of it is federal land. And so, do you see a path forward there? There's also the litigation that's out there that went to the Supreme Court. And, where do you see this headed?
Yeah, so we would love to see a Utah Act for the state of Utah. When you look at the map that I very first showed you about all the purple, right, we have more than contributed our fair share to the conservation side of this equation. when you look at all the wilderness study areas, et cetera, that you have. So yeah, having a process that we go through would be phenomenal. And one of the people I work here in the state of Utah at BLM, they were in charge of doing a lot of the acquisitions for schools, and they just had a process down, which took them about a month or two, and they would send the plans over to BLM and get them back. And that's the kind of process we're looking for. If we had a month or two process, I can't tell you how wonderful that would be to get new schools built, to get new infrastructure in for water, those kind of things. We would love to have that. The disposal lawsuit that you brought up, really what we want is to have an equal share of how these lands are managed. And right now, we just don't feel like we have an equal say in how these public lands are managed. And to your point earlier, I mean, Utah's only is number 2 in the percentage of lands managed by the federal government. So it does have real impacts. Eric talked about quite a few of those, both as his experience in Washington County and over in Garfield County, where the Grand Staircase is. So yeah, that's what we're really after, is more of a say in how the lands are managed.
I think that's certainly sounds reasonable from my perspective. I'm talking today from the great state of Maine, where we have Acadia National Park, which we love, but there was a new effort to establish a new national park, which was less than 0.5% of the state of Maine, and the public opposition was just huge. So I think it would be difficult for any state east of Mississippi to deal with and to kind of tolerate the amount of public lands, which nobody is questioning is a great benefit, but also really constrains in some cases. But Eric, thoughts from you?
Yeah, I'll do an analogy that I think a lot of people from around the country can understand a little better. Um, so if you're in a public land county, a whole lot of what goes on in that county is regulated, law enforced, controlled by the federal government. And you see people up in arms when a president of the United States decides to send law enforcement officers into different places, because they're used to local control. But we live in places where the vast majority of our land, we don't have that ability to a lot of times even have a seat at the table in how the land is managed or what it can be used for. And that's hard. Like local control matters.
Yeah, you mentioned, in earlier discussions how sometimes decisions by DC are made without adequate local input, that these decisions, presidential decisions on monuments get made, maybe a little bit of input, but it has a tremendous impact upon these communities. I also want to shift to gateway communities. Obviously, there's gateway communities in Utah to the national lands, public lands, parks that, again, housing is a big issue, affordable housing. And, many of the federal employees have to travel long distances to live in places that are affordable. So, I mean, what are the needs of these communities? Talk to me, if you will, about kind of the tax base and how that's impacted also by public lands. Anyone want to take that?
So I'll hop in if you don't mind. I think, for the last week, 10 days, we've been really concerned about the government shutdown. As you're talking about gateway communities, right? Talk about communities that are going to be impacted. So the state of Utah is doing everything we can to work with Department of Interior to see if we can keep these national parks open so that, people are able to still go there and enjoy the parks. We want to see the restrooms open, the trash still collected. We want to see them managed properly. But, the state of Utah is willing to come in and help wherever we can there. So those are the kind of things that you don't think about, right? You think, oh, it's a national park. You just drive in, you enjoy it. But no, there are times like we're facing today where those parks might be closed, and there will be huge impacts, not just to the visitors, but also the businesses that rely on that visitation. They won't come, and depending on how long the shutdown is, the people will just change their reservations and cancel them. So, those kind of federal decisions And both parties, when it happened under Obama, it
Yeah.
was a rough go. It might be a rough go this week. So I'm not talking party politics there. It's just
Mm,
reality on the ground.
right.
We have those impacts. Now, when it comes to the housing, yeah, you look at Moab or Springdale or a lot of these other communities around the parks, they are land constrained. And so if we are going to do some development, it would be nice to do it on some of those lands. And the other thing I would say there's we have limited agricultural lands in the state of Utah, what we call our prime soils. And a lot of the federal land is on the foothill, right? And so from the state's perspective, we'd rather see houses built on the foothills
Hmm.
and not take out our prime soils because our only option in most cases is taking out where we're growing food for our animals or food for people. So just another thing to throw out there, a little
Hmm.
twist that a lot of people don't think about.
Yeah, that's good perspective. Um, when in talking to a lot of my colleagues who again are opposed to the efforts in the reconciliation debate and came out in opposition to that, it generated a lot of good conversation. And one of the concerns that was expressed, well, if there is land disposal, and how are you dealing with growth and water? Water is obviously, is a rare commodity out west. It's becoming more and more rare with some of the distressed areas. And so maybe somebody could talk to me about that, how communities are addressing that issue, and if there is more growth, how do you accommodate that growth with already limited water resources?
Well, Brian, if you want to go, you can take it. Otherwise, I'm happy to take it.
Go ahead, Eric.
You go for it, Eric, and then I'll clean up.
Um, water solutions are super important in the West United States right now, like in every state in the West United States. Well, everything that draws from the Colorado River, and they're expensive and they require crossing federal lands. And the solutions that are out there, the thing that we've done a ton in southwestern Utah to stretch our water. Um, the population of Washington County has doubled, more than doubled every 20 years since 1960.
Wow.
And it's just explosive, similar to Las Vegas. And so we've had to get better at using that water that we have really carefully and wisely. And you're seeing that. You're seeing huge improvements um, along those lines. And and the goal is to be able to do that in a way that you don't end up with a gravel coated city,
Hmm.
but that you have well urban plan designed spaces and public spaces, and then we have design standards. Every new home has to have water recirculation pumps, hot water recirculation pumps, like just little things to try to help us with our water conservation. Um, and the market's demanding that, like not just as Mother Nature's demanding that, and the market's demanding that, and so we're getting much better at those things. It's hard when we want to try to be super proactive and we don't have federal planners at the table to work with us on that.
Mm.
When you're surrounded by public lands and you want to run a new pipe and it's going to cross an acre of BLM land, um, or you're going to put in a really small reservoir in a community, but to do so again is a 5 to 10 year process.
Wow.
It prevents us from being able to accomplish things.
Yeah. I want to stay on that note for a second too. I mean, is it a matter of having federal employees closer to these towns to have that engagement? Do they need to engage more? Is it a matter, of changing federal policy to expedite, or is it both? I mean, it's, you've got an absentee landlord in DC and to some degree. But what are the answers to helping expedite these
So
what seem to be very reasonable projects? So,
I don't think it's the federal employees. I think we've got by and large great federal employees that want to do good work and care just like everybody else that lives in their communities.
Mm,
I that's not to say that you don't have people who are agenda driven now and then, but we get that in wherever you go.
hmm
And so I'm not one who lays things on the backs of federal employees. Um, but their processes are, I mean, try it. The next time that you're in a Western community, walk into local Forest Service or BLM office and find someone who doesn't man like a public facing desk but runs a desk in the back and ask them like what permits are you working on and how long you've been working on them.
Yeah.
And they're so frustrated at how
Mm,
burdensome the process is and how long it takes to do anything and how many levels they have to run it up the line to get approval to do little things, big
mm.
things, whatever it is.
So it's the red
Um,
tape. It's a lot of times the red tape that we
it,
hear, proverbial red
yep.
tape.
I think
Yeah.
this is a good opportunity for Brian to hop in, but I do have one thought on this before we switch to another topic. But Brian,
Brian, what are you
Oh,
doing about
sure.
red tape? Removing red tape.
Well, I appreciate you asking, and I think we've hit on a very valuable thing here, right? One of the best things that government can do, and is promote predictability
Mm,
when it comes to some of these things, and that predictability can come in terms of, how soon am I going to get an answer from the government? What kind of process is this going to take? And is there going to be some consistency that's not going to ride the regulatory pendulum, right? Of
mm,
administration to administration changing and changing. So what we see that with that on public lands often is things like permitting, right? When people want to permit and when they want to do it the right things and that way, and when it takes investment, because while we're talking about multiple use, for example, one of the things is using the land to produce the benefits of responsible mining, timber
mm,
use and things like that. How long is that going to take? Is it realistically that I could ever do that? We can get into that. That's another topic.
mm,
But also when it comes to responsible, the process that we talked about of hey, are there responsible dispositions of land that can be done and things like that, or are there responsible uses of this federal land that we can cooperate it on? Sometimes they get tied up with federal red tape, and
mm,
that does seem cliche, but it's just a real thing. And if you want to go back to talking about water here, I think I heard the big beautiful bill reference for a second there, Brent. One of the most aggressive things that Washington County is working on is how to responsibly utilize water. And Eric and Reg can jump in and make sure and give me the hook or correct me here. But when we saw some of those amendments and some of that language, we're talking about places to put in wellheads. We're talking about places to run you know, uh, water pipelines for reservoirs. One of the things that we're going to have to do out west and that they do real well in Washington County, you got to catch every ounce of water that you can. And then you put it to responsible use, then you reuse it, and then you safeguard that water and do everything you can. Well, the fact of the matter is the feds just aren't a great partner in that.
mm,
And so that's why we saw things like the Toker Reservoir, being conveyed um, to, I believe it was the county. Eric can correct me on that one in that part of it, but is because it's a lot easier to manage and aggressively manage good water policy when you don't have to trip over the feds all the time and get caught in
mm.
their revolving door of whatever regulation that is next and what other agency needs to regulate you. Look, regulation's good, but man, we've gotten to a state where we're just tripping over ourselves and can't get much done. So,
Mm,
Brian, if I could, I just want to go back to the non-development side of the equation, right?
mhm,
So I'd ask your listeners and viewers to go back to that photo that I showed earlier with our tent there with all the dead wood, dead trees behind it. So not only is it difficult for the development side, very difficult there, but even for us to do good ecological projects to return forests to a healthy forest, uh, this gets in the way of a lot
mm,
of that. And these administrative changes, right? So yeah, the roadless rule came out of the Clinton administration. While it may have good intentions, with the specifics that they put in those rules, either that limits what we can do actively, or what Forest Service personnel are willing to go, and kind of push that barrier. But most of all, it's litigation material for these groups that love to litigate, and then take payments from the Equal Access to Justice Act and then go and litigate something else. That's another part that with the roadless rule, it's not that we want to see, all of that in a timber mill. Would we love to see some timber mills come back? Yes, we used to have 40 viable timber mills here in the state of Utah, and I think now we have 3. So when you're trying to get a forest that looks like that back to a healthy condition, we have a lot of rebuilding to do, because we need the personnel that have the expertise and the equipment to go in and do this. So even if we do get the roadless rule pulled back, it will take decades to get those forests back to a healthy condition. And to Brian's point, we need some continuity in land use planning, whether you're talking for ecological health, watershed health, water use, all of those things. We need more continuity, which is why we're asking for more local input and more local management when it comes to these federal decisions.
Yeah. Reg, thanks for that. The pictures, and I understand that some of our listeners may not have been able to see the slides, but the one picture of all the dead trees on the mountainside. I mean, we've had catastrophic wildfires in California that have been so devastating. I mean, that to me looks like a lot of fuel buildup in those woods that really could have significant impact upon local communities, the environment. I remember I was out in Yellowstone in 1988 working out there when we had the great fires. And you can still see the impacts. The catastrophic wildfires are not the same as routine normal wildfires. They're much hotter and they create much more damage, including to watersheds and water quality and other things. So, to me, it seems like it sounds reasonable to request the opportunity to go in and manage and remove a lot of that dead fuel. So,
And I'll tell you this,
go
Brent,
ahead,
real
Brad.
quick, as you talk about it, you talk about before the fire burns, right? And we've got some beautiful forests in Utah, both before they're burned and unfortunately after they're burned. Um, we've got local people who live in these small towns who want to contribute to the economy. They want to utilize some of the timber, and they want to work with the land to kind of cut down some of that fuel
Mm-hmm.
and make it so it's not such a big timber box. And then when you see these trees turn into smoke, a lot of times because of how burdensome it is to be able to get access to that land, and we're talking about local people who love the land. They don't want to ruin the viewscape. They don't want to tear it up or anything like that, but they want to utilize it for common sense purposes. And then you see it into smoke, turn into smoke. It's a tough thing. Afterward, when you see a bunch of snags and you see a bunch of burned things that probably ought to be mitigated in a hurry, but yet, all over the country, this is happening too, that there are people who say, boy, I just can't get through all the bureaucratic process to be able to quickly go in and utilize what's there and what could be
Right.
utilized in a way that could really contribute to the landscape. So it's both an economic, a viewscape, and a landscape problem
Yep.
issue.
Yep. Yeah. Well put. I want to pivot a little bit and talk about checkerboard land and access to public lands, and if we can. And I know some states like Montana, this is a big issue where you have, and some of our listening audience may not recognize this, but historically how the lands were allocated and ownership created these checkerboard, and maybe one of you could address that. But is there an opportunity for disposal or land swaps where we could actually increase the access to some of these public lands that are not accessible right now because of private property and other issues? Maybe, who would like to, anyone want to take that on?
I'll take that one on.
Okay.
Reg is
So
our expert.
yeah, we would love to, see some solutions there. The state of Utah has done so much to protect access to our public lands, and we want to continue that. And anywhere that we can figure out good solutions, where we're blocking, private land up and blocking these other lands up. So we're closely following what's going on in Wyoming and Montana and some of these other areas. And seeing what the solutions they have and working with them on possible solutions. Luckily, if you look at the majority of our public lands, we don't have that much of an issue with some of the other states. We do up in the Box Elder area and some of those areas we do have some checkerboard, but not as much as other states. But would we love to find some solutions there? Yes. I do want to talk a little bit about access to public lands because that's something our office has been working on a lot. Under the last administration, the Biden administration, they closed about 2,000 miles of roads that access our public lands. We have litigated all those travel management plans and are working to try and get the access opened back up. So far, it looks good, but we won't know until we get to the finish line there. The other effort that we have is our RS-2477 litigation, where we're claiming that the state has a vested right in these roads that are on public land, specifically BLM lands is where we're focused. We have about 12,000 roads that we're litigating on. Last summer, we got a really good ruling out of the district court saying that we do in fact have a vested right in those roads, and it's great. It's moving forward, but federal litigation is actually slower than land acquisition. So it takes a long time to get to a solution. We're happy with the direction that it's going, but the effort really is for the state of Utah to keep access open to public lands. And it's messaged very different by some of the special interest groups that are litigating in that arena. But that is our number one goal, is to keep access open for mountain bikers, for ranchers, for prospecting for critical minerals. We can't just send thumper trucks across the landscape like we did in the early 70s and late 60s. So for all those reasons, we want to keep those lands open. And for our local communities, I mean, a lot of these lands are where they go to recreate. We call it Eastering, where you go out and Easter and you find a camping spot that your family's used for generations. And I still do it with my family. I know a lot of other families do it. So it is a cultural thing as well as it is a policy.
That's awesome. So we do have a question from Dan. Dan asked, what would you like to see Congress do differently in its future efforts to grant land management relief, given how unsuccessful the previous effort was during reconciliation? Maybe Brian, maybe that's best directed to you.
Well, good question. And Dan, thanks for asking it. Again, I'll just say predictability, right, is a big thing. We need process. We need to have confidence in our processes. And I've spent my time as a lawyer trying to build up respect for the law, right? We need to promote respect for the law and the administrative processes that we have for public lands by making them so that there's confidence in them, right? That our administrative agencies, our bureaucracies are actually going to serve the people. And that there's consistency in the way that these processes go, but also that they're shorter, right?
Yep.
So that's one thing. Look, a good balance between local and federal control is just going to be important. Sometimes our local partners, they just do a better job, and we can argue to which degrees. That's not what I'm here for, but they just do, and our federal partners have their benefits. So we need to work together a lot closer. And I could go off on a whole bunch of other stuff. We could talk about the big beautiful bill, but I'll let these other guys have a shot at that answer. So
okay. Thoughts from others? Reg, Eric?
I'll jump in and say that litigation reform, streamlining appeals of public land use decisions. The red tape wasn't created by Congress. The red tape has grown in reaction to the fact that every BLM decision made, in or near Red Rock, wilderness, open space, they have to do it planning on spending years litigating it after they make the decision. And so then they've created so many things to try to make sure they win the litigation that's where the red tape comes from. And so finding ways for Congress to streamline appeal processes, and because they shouldn't take that long. When you sue over a land use decision, it's generally an Administrative Procedures Act lawsuit on the record. You're not taking years doing depositions. You're not doing all those things. It's just
Mm.
supposed to be a review. Um, but things have grown because of that
Right.
litigation.
Well, I know
We've
there's a
got a
big
couple of
focus.
really
Oh, go
good
ahead, Rich. Yeah.
lawsuits, I think, that are putting some sideboards finally on some of that litigation. So we're really happy to see those Supreme Court decisions, and
Mm.
most of them have been unanimous decisions coming out of the Supreme Court. So we're really hopeful that this issue is being recognized, and there are currently some sideboards being put on that. One other thing I'd like to add to the discussion about the better process is our office and most of the counties and many cities sign up as cooperating agencies when we are going through these planning processes or NEPA projects. And that's something that some administrations are very good about working with you, and some administrations take your comments and put them in the round file
Mm.
underneath their desk. And if there was a way that we could kind of solidify that, yes, you have to take the local community's input serious. It needs to be analyzed. It needs to be part of the NEPA process. Don't want to get too in the weeds, but there's different alternatives that are in these NEPA processes. If one of those always had to be like a local alternative, that would be a great move in the right direction as well. Same with the governor's consistency review on some of these decisions. Some administrations are very good about working with the governor's office and making sure that we're heard, that our input is given, and other administrations could care less what the governor of the state has to say. Couple thoughts.
Yes, thank you. Well, we've got another question from a caller. What are your thoughts about the pushback from oil executives about oil and gas development on public lands and the Trump administration that prevents them from making large long-term investments based on policies and executive orders that do not have predictability? Anyone want to take that? Is that
Yeah, maybe Brian and I can hit that one. So I don't care which side of the aisle you're on. Ruling by executive order is tough because
Mm.
it's not a long-term fix,
Right?
right? But it is the tool that we have, and it's the tool that is being used. So I don't blame any administration for using that tool because
Mm.
that's what helps them get to where they're trying to go in their administration. But yes, absolutely, we need Congress to step up and, do the job that they need to do to make that long-term certainty so that we have predictability and we have that certainty. It is critical, not in just the oil and gas industry, but in many of our industry, the geothermal industry, right? They want to see more predictability. We want to
Mm.
see more predictability when we're doing habitat work, right? That as we start on a
Yep.
project, it's not going to be shut down on the next project. So across the board, whether it's for development or for ecological purposes, we need that predictability. Long-term planning, we'd love to see like 50-year plans these federal lands, not 4-year plans.
Mm. You guys are just asking for way too much, from my perspective.
I guess it's job
Predictability.
security. I guess it's job security.
Oh my goodness.
It's great to manage public lands in 2 to 4 year increments, isn't it? The trees grow fast, right?
Yeah, right. Well, we're coming up at the top of the hour, so really am grateful for you three taking the time to provide perspective. And these are not easy discussions. A lot of times, like I said, there's people that are passionate on both sides of the aisle. I think we can agree that a lot of the litigation is needless and needs to be stopped. Um, but so closing arguments, I'd ask each of you to just what's one takeaway that you hope the audience will leave with from today's discussion? And Brian, maybe I'll start with you.
Hey, first of all, I want to say thanks. Huge honor to just be in this conversation and, on behalf of my boss. Look, if I had a takeaway here, it'd be, hey, look, let's talk a lot. We got a lot in common on this and a
Yeah.
lot more in common when it comes to public lands than we think. And what I've learned the last few months, I hope I'm not straying too far from the topic, is that before we hit the big red button on some of these policies, let's talk.
Yeah.
There's a lot of emotion, and frankly, I don't mean this to be a jab in the eye to anyone. There's a lot of misinformation out there,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And if we're talking and we really get down to some of the brass tacks on some of this public land issue, it's you start to say, oh, I kind of get that, you know.
Mhm.
Yeah, particularly in a state like Utah. I'm convinced that, hey, we love our public lands. I think all Utahns love our public lands. Some of us have a lot different ideas. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to say we're all aligned on that, but there is a lot of common sense policy that exists and a lot of common sense efforts that are being done and that have been undertaken lately. And so I hope we can talk more and, you know, in each of our interests,
Those are
there's a
words
lot
of
of good stuff
wisdom,
we can get done. So
Brian.
thank you for making this happen.
Absolutely, Brian. Those are words of wisdom, and I would just say there's a halo behind your head that is very appropriate with those closing comments. So, Eric, thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'll piggyback off of Brian and kind of stick with that theme. And I'll use we didn't talk about Endangered Species Act. I'll use endangered
Right.
species as an example. Um, I love working to protect endangered species.
Mm,
Like I think that we can come in and if you sit down with local players in a community, they don't want to see the public lands changed in a way that impacts their way of life.
hmm
They want to keep like they've chosen to live there because they love what they get to do there. And they don't want to see those public lands go away and the recreation and opportunities go away. Um, and there's so many places where we could sit down together and work together with people from different perspectives because we share those same desires to preserve, protect. Um, Unfortunately, what happens is we get hung up on we like, pick our team and don't move off of the goal line to come together and work on stuff. And we can't get stuff done. But the more that we can talk, the more that we can recognize that everybody is in the interest of leaving the land in a better place than the way we found it.
Well
Everybody's in the
stated.
interest of wanting our kids to be able to get out there. And I don't think anybody's in the interest of trying to choke out existing communities. But that has happened. I come from an area where my family moved into Southwest Utah in the 1870s to 1890s and has been there ever since. On both sides, my mom's side and my dad's side of my family. And I'm like, we're about done.
Mm,
My dad was one of six siblings. He has zero siblings living in the area, living in the rural areas, um, where we grew up. I'm the oldest of seven. I have one sister who's left in the area,
mm,
and she works a gateway community job that's seasonal, and she gets laid off every winter.
mm.
Um, we've choked communities in the name of conservation to the point where it's fundamentally changing lifestyles. I don't think that's anybody's goal,
Mhm.
but that's what's been happening because of things.
Thanks for that, Eric. Reg, you get the first word and you get the last word today. So,
Well, I don't know how I compete against Brian and his Halo, so I'm going to do the best I can. But I think those guys summed it up really well, and I know we're about out
yeah,
of time, so I just want to say thank you very much for the opportunity to come and
yeah,
talk to you
yep,
and your audience. The state of Utah, as has been said, we are very thoughtful about our public lands. We want to see good management ecologically. We want people to come visit them. We want them to be the same in 100 years or 1,000 years as they are today. We do believe in multiple use and the sustained yield side, but I got to say we do have some concerns when it comes to these
mhm,
large scale, like monument proclamations. We discussed offline a little bit about some of the damage that we're seeing by this increase in visitation without the appropriate funding
yep,
coming to manage these large landscape scale monuments. So if you hear the state of Utah is, looking at different things, there is a reason behind it. We're not out here trying to impact these areas. In fact, we want them protected as much as everybody else. We may have a different idea of how is best to do that. And we would love to sit down and talk to people if you ever have concerns about what we are trying to accomplish. But as the
Yeah.
governor likes to say, let's disagree better.
Mm. Yes. Well said. So, and Brian will take you up on your offer to talk more. So I think talking more with people we may disagree with is a healthy thing. So we need more of it. So want to thank you three. Um, really appreciate your perspective on these important issues and to the people of Utah. And um, thank you again for your time and your perspectives today. And I appreciate those who called in today. So everyone have a great day.